It was the kind of June morning that smells like endings. Too bright, too loud, too full of families pretending not to cry. Riverside High's auditorium was drowning in applause when my name echoed through the speakers. Mrs. Lorraine Carter, collecting the diploma on behalf of Tasha Green. I stood up, smoothed the wrinkles on my borrowed floral dress, and walked toward the stage. My knees ached. My palms were damp. Tasha had the flu that week. She begged me to go in her place. "It'll be just a formality, Aunt Lo," she'd said. A formality, yes. Until I opened the envelope. There it was. Printed in navy blue ink. Dr. Harold E. Carter, Principal, Riverside High School. The signature looked almost alive. Each stroke curved with the same careless confidence that once wrote love letters to me. My vision blurred. My breath caught somewhere between disbelief and nausea. "Lorraine, are you all right?" the school secretary whispered behind me. I couldn't answer. My eyes locked on that loop in the letter E, tilted just the way he used to tilt his head when he lied and said, "I'll never leave." 17 years. No divorce papers. No phone call. No death certificate. Just silence, thick enough to bury a whole marriage. And now, his name, resurrected, printed on the certificate that would define my niece's future. I sank into the nearest chair as the band started playing Pomp and Circumstance. The brass notes swelled and cracked in my ears. Students tossed their caps, cameras flashed. The world clapped for dreams while mine trembled in my hands. The paper smelled faintly of toner and fresh ink. His ink. The same scent I used to smell on his shirts when I'd iron them before faculty meetings. The same color he used for every important signature. I had once joked that Harold loved that blue pen more than he loved me. Maybe I wasn't wrong. "He's signing another future," I muttered under my breath, my lips barely moving. "He's been signing them for years, just not mine." The secretary smiled politely, not hearing me, already moving on to the next name. My fingers trembled, smudging the edge of his signature. It didn't blur, of course it didn't. Harold's marks never faded, only people did. For a moment, I thought about walking up to that stage, demanding to see him. Demanding to know how many lives he had rewritten while erasing mine. But I stayed seated, frozen in a sea of clapping hands and proud families. Somewhere above the noise, I imagined his voice again. "Lorraine, you have to trust me. My work will mean something someday." Oh, maybe this was what he meant. His work now meant something. It meant watching his ex-wife hold a diploma with his name stamped on it like a curse. I folded the paper slowly, the edges sharp enough to cut skin. My throat burned. "How many more lives has he signed?" I whispered, "besides mine?" And that was the moment I knew. The man who destroyed me had somehow become the one authorizing other people's futures. I used to teach at that very same school. Back then, Harold was the new higher bright smile, spotless shoes, the kind of man who shook every hand a second too long because he already saw himself in a higher chair. He taught educational management to fresh graduates while I handled art and design for the middle schoolers. We met over a broken projector. He came to fix it. I stayed to thank him. That's how it started. A smudge of chalk on my sleeve, his laugh echoing down the hallway. We married when I was 25, he 28. I wore a second-hand dress with paint stains on the hem. He promised the world in a rented church with bad acoustics. "When I become a principal," he said, holding my paint-splattered fingers, "you'll have your own gallery inside the school next to my office. Your art deserves walls, Lorraine." I believed him. Back then, believing him was easier than believing in myself. He was ambitious in ways I wasn't. I measured time by sketches drying on the rack. He measured it by promotions and titles. So I traded my dreams for stability. I stopped applying for exhibitions, stopped joining weekend markets. Instead, I took extra tutoring shifts, drawing portraits of students' pets and grandmothers for $45 apiece to help pay for his doctoral classes. Each time the tuition invoice came, I'd write the check and sign my name neatly in blue ink, his favorite color. "Looks professional," he'd say, and kiss my hand. Funny how that color now makes me sick. Those were lean years. Our apartment smelled of turpentine and instant noodles. We couldn't afford both heat and art supplies, so I painted in gloves, watching my breath fog against the canvas. Yet every night, Harold would sit beside me, muttering educational theories while I blended pigments. "We'll make it, Lo," he'd whisper. "Once I finish this dissertation, everything changes." He wasn't lying about change. He just forgot to mention in whose favor. When he finally got his degree, he celebrated by buying himself a fountain pen, sleek silver, with blue ink cartridges shipped from England. He called it his signature weapon. I laughed then. Now I know what kind of weapon it was. A year later, the school board sent him to a conference in Atlanta. "Just 3 days," he said, tossing a suit into the suitcase. I packed him a sandwich, slid a note into the pocket. "Proud of you. Come home soon." He never did. No call, no email, no explanation. After a week, I called the hotel. "Dr. Carter checked out," they said. "Left yesterday morning." By the second week, I filed a missing person report. By the third, I was told maybe he'd chosen to start over. "It happens," the officer said. "People walk away. Walk away from a life, a mortgage, a woman who sold her paintings to pay for their groceries." Then one afternoon, my inbox chimed. The sender, Assistant Harold Carter, org. Subject line, notice. "Dr. Carter has transferred to a new institution. Please refrain from further contact." That was all. No goodbye, no signature, just the cold impersonality of his absence. I remember standing in my studio, still holding the mouse, unable to blink. Outside, the rain had just started. Thin lines against the window pane. The smell of wet paper mixed with turpentine filled the room. I reached for the nearest thing. My bottle of blue ink, and before I knew it, my hand knocked it over. The ink spilled across the unfinished portrait of him I'd been painting. His half-smile, that smug tilt of his head. The color spread, creeping into the whites of his eyes, bleeding down to his collar, swallowing him whole. It looked disturbingly like blood. I didn't wipe it off. I let it dry there. That night, I slept on the studio floor. Every creak of the pipes sounded like footsteps coming home. Every vibration from the fridge felt like his phone buzzing somewhere far away. Days turned into months. The bills kept coming. I sold my car, then my engagement ring. Why, the landlord knocked. "You're behind again. Mrs. Carter." Eventually, the school replaced me with a younger teacher who could connect better with modern students. I left without protest. My hands were too tired to fight for anything by then. For a while, I tried to convince myself he might be dead. It was easier than thinking he'd simply chosen to vanish. I pictured car accidents, plane crashes, even kidnappings. But deep down, I knew Harold Carter never disappeared by accident. He orchestrated exits like he wrote essays, methodically, with perfect grammar. The world moved on. I rented a small basement apartment and started drawing faces from memory. People who once passed through my life and never looked back. I sold enough to eat, barely enough to live. But I kept one habit. Every New Year's Eve, I'd take out that old bottle of dried blue ink and throw it away. I told myself I'd refill it someday when I could afford to start painting again. I never did. 17 years of silence is its own kind of education. You learn the texture of betrayal. The way it doesn't scream but hums quietly, like a refrigerator at midnight. So standing there, in Riverside High's auditorium, holding a diploma signed Dr. Dorium, Harold E. Carter, wasn't just shock. It was a full circle haunting. All at once, every sacrifice, every night spent sketching for $45. Every bill I paid for his ambition came flooding back. And for the first time, I realized he hadn't disappeared. He'd simply graduated from me. The first portrait I ever drew of Harold was on a late April afternoon when the cherry blossoms behind the faculty building were almost gone. He stood under the elm tree near the parking lot, pretending not to notice me sketching him from the art room window. "Caught me again," he said, laughing, when I finally showed him the drawing. He looked younger then. Hair still thick, eyes too curious for their own good. He tilted his head toward the paper. "You see everything, Lorraine, even the parts people don't show." I told him Art was just observation, not magic. But he shook his head. No. It's belief. You look at the world like everything deserves to be signed, as if even a leaf has a story waiting to be claimed. That was Harold, always turning compliments into philosophies. He made everything sound important. Even us. Back then, we didn't have money for dates. We'd sit in my tiny studio after class, sharing a cup of instant coffee and listening to the pipes knock inside the walls. He'd read pieces of his dissertation aloud while I cleaned brushes. You know, he said once, when I become a principal, I'll need someone to design the school crest. Maybe you can draw it, something classic, something that says legacy. I remember laughing. Legacy. Sounded so far away when your rent was due in 2 days. Still, I drew for him. A crest with a rising sun and an open book. He loved it so much he framed it. Said he'd keep it until the day he had his own office. I thought it meant our office. Sometimes, when the electricity went out, we'd light a candle and talk about the future. I told him I wanted to paint full-time someday, maybe open a community art program for kids who couldn't afford lessons. He nodded, tracing my knuckles with his thumb. We'll get there, he said. Once I'm done with this degree, you won't have to worry about anything. I believed him, completely. He had that voice that made promises sound like facts. He wasn't cruel back then, not yet, just ambitious. The kind of man who could make a dream sound so possible you'd sell your own to help him build his. I remember the smell of his notebook, old leather and coffee, the way he'd hum when he wrote, tapping his pen against the table in rhythm. He used to sign every draft with his initials, H.E.C. He said it made him feel accountable. If I don't put my name on something, it isn't real, he told me. How ironic. Years later, he'd use that same name to make everything unreal, to erase, replace, and rewrite without a trace of remorse. There was one evening, our anniversary maybe, when he brought home a cheap bottle of wine and a stack of old exam papers. He'd just been offered a temporary administrative post. He handed me the letter and said, "It's small, but it's a start. They'll see what I can do." He kissed my cheek, then whispered, "Someday, they'll all know my name." And because I loved him, I smiled and said, "Then they'll know mine too." He laughed, poured the wine, and raised his glass. To names that last forever. It's strange what stays in your memory. The clink of glasses, the stain of red wine on his white shirt, the sound of our upstairs neighbor arguing through the ceiling. Nothing extraordinary, yet it becomes the scene you replay when everything falls apart. I never kept that first portrait. It got lost when I moved out of our old apartment. But I remember it perfectly. Him under the elm, eyes half closed, sunlight breaking through the leaves in uneven patches. I remember how proud I was of the signature I'd added in the corner, Lorraine Carter, 1993. It was the first time I'd signed his last name. And I thought it meant belonging. If I'd known what that signature would cost me, 17 years of waiting, of wondering, I might have left the canvas blank. Because now, when I think about that day, all I can see is the irony. He once told me everything deserves to be signed. And one day, he'd prove it by signing things that were never his to claim, not even me. 3 months before graduation day, Tasha came home from school, still in her uniform, phone in hand. "Aunt Lo," she said between bites of cereal, "we've got a new principal. Dr. Carter. Everyone says he's super strict. The seniors are already terrified." I didn't look up from the dishes. "Carter's a common name, honey," I said. "Well, don't worry about it." I meant it as a joke, but something about the way she said Dr. Cummett. Carter scratched the back of my mind. Later that night, while scrolling through Facebook, I stumbled across the school's post. "Welcome our new principal, Dr. Brew. Harold Carter." The photo wasn't clear taken from the side, a crowd of teachers blocking half his face. But he was shaking hands with the superintendent, head tilted slightly to the left, collar uneven, like it always used to be when I nagged him to fix it before class. My thumb froze above the screen. That tilt. That posture. It was him. I told myself it couldn't be. Harold Carter was hardly an uncommon name. and my Harold had vanished nearly 2 decades ago. Maybe it was just someone with the same build, the same unfortunate habit of buttoning the collar unevenly. Still, my pulse wouldn't settle. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred, and there it was, the faint outline of his old fountain pen clipped to his pocket. The same silver pen I bought him after his dissertation defense. The same one he called his signature weapon. I laughed out loud, though it didn't sound like laughter. No, I muttered, he wouldn't dare. For the next few days, I avoided looking at school news. But little things kept finding me. Flyers left on my porch advertising new community initiatives led by Principal Carter. A parent at the grocery store talking about how the new headmaster had such authority, such class. Each time I heard his name, something twisted inside me. A mix of anger and disbelief and something uglier I couldn't name. One afternoon, Tasha showed me a short clip on her phone. The school had posted a welcome video. The camera panned over the auditorium, stopping briefly on him as he shook hands with the staff. He was older, grayer, but his shoulders carried the same confidence, the same weight of a man who believed the world was his to approve or deny. "See?" Tasha said proudly. He even used blue ink for his welcome notes. Kind of classy, right? I felt the blood drain from my face. "Blue ink?" I asked quietly. "Yeah, he insists on it. Even made a rule about all official letters being signed in blue so they can't be copied easily." I forced a smile. Smart man. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan turning slow, heavy circles. The sound reminded me of the night before he left, the way the blades spun while he packed his suitcase, humming under his breath. I could still hear the last thing he said. "It's just a short trip, Lo. Don't wait up." The next morning, I found myself typing his name into Google, my hands shaking. Dr. Harold E. Carter, Principal, Riverside High School. The search results came instantly. School newsletters, a LinkedIn profile, a photo of him speaking at an education conference in Atlanta. Caption read, "Dr. Carter, a leader in educational ethics." Ethics. I shut the laptop so fast the screen flickered. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped the air out. For weeks after, I said nothing. I told myself I was being paranoid. People change. Faces blur with time. It could all be coincidence. But then, 2 weeks before graduation, a letter arrived in the mail addressed to Ms. Lorraine Carter. The envelope bore the school's logo. Inside was an invitation. "You are cordially invited to attend the graduation ceremony of Riverside High School to honor the achievements of your relative, Tasha Green." At the bottom, printed in elegant script, was the name, Dr. Harold E. Carter, Principal. The signature glimmered in blue ink. My fingers traced the letters, the loops of his name that once filled our rent checks, the same tilt in the E that used to make me tease him for writing like a poet. The room tilted slightly. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't coincidence. It was him. The man I buried in my past was alive, thriving, and now, somehow, signing the diplomas of children I helped raise. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. 17 years, I whispered, and he still finds a way to sign where he doesn't belong. Would you like me to continue with 2? 7. The triggering event, 1,000 to 1,200 words. Next, the public, humiliating scene at the graduation ceremony when Lorraine finally sees him again and everything collapses. 3 months before that ceremony, Tasha came home bubbling with news. "Aunt Lo, we've got a new principal, Dr. Carter. People say he's the strictest they've ever had." I rinsed a coffee mug and said without looking up, "Carter's a common name, sweetheart. Don't worry." But the name snagged somewhere deep inside me. That night, I saw the school's Facebook post welcoming Dr. Harold Carter. The photo was blurry, taken from behind a crowd, yet the man's collar sat uneven on the left side, the same way Harold used to wear it no matter how many times I straightened it for him. My thumb trembled over the screen. It was coincidence. Maybe not. A week later, a parent at the grocery store chatted about the new headmaster, so polished, with that silver pen he always clips to his shirt pocket. My stomach turned. That pen had been my gift after his dissertation defense, engraved with his initials, filled with imported blue ink. Tasha showed me a short video from school. He appeared for only a second, shaking hands with a teacher. Older, grayer, but the same stance, the same certainty in his shoulders. He even insists on blue ink for every official letter, she said, laughing. Lay says it proves authenticity. Blue ink. My pulse skipped. Authenticity. He'd forged that word long ago. That night, I searched his name online. Dr. Harold E. Carter, Principal, Riverside High School. Dozens of results appeared. Conference photos, local news praising his reforms, a headline calling him a model of educational ethics. I shut the laptop so fast the screen blinked out. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, steady as a heartbeat I didn't want to hear. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived addressed to Ms. Michael. Lorraine Carter. Inside lay an invitation to Riverside's graduation ceremony for Tasha Green, signed in a flourish of blue, Dr. Harold E. Carter, Principal. I ran my fingers over the ink. The loops of his name were identical to the ones that once appeared on rent checks, on love letters, on the life we built before he vanished. My vision blurred. I folded the invitation carefully and whispered to the empty room. 17 years gone, and he's still signing places he doesn't belong. That night, I didn't sleep. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every memory. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint whistle of the wind under the door. All of it sounded like him breathing somewhere close. I opened my laptop and typed the name again, Dr. Harold E. Carter. The school website loaded slowly, as if teasing me with every pixel. Yep, there he was. Title, Principal. Riverside High School. Smiling. Gray hair now, a few lines around his eyes, but still the same half-smirk that once made me believe he knew exactly where life was going. I studied that smile until my eyes stung. The caption under his picture read, "Dedicated to shaping the next generation of leaders." Leaders. He couldn't lead a marriage, yet he was shaping the future of hundreds of children. I shut the laptop and turned to the wall where my unfinished paintings hung. Canvases I hadn't touched in years. They looked ghostly under the weak light, all faces blurred, colors faded. 17 years of work no one had ever seen. I reached for the envelope holding Tasha's diploma and laid it beside the old portrait I'd painted of Harold under the elm tree. Same smile, same tilt of the head, same signature down in the corner, now mocking me from both the past and the present. My throat tightened. The question came out as a whisper. Does he get to sign my life one more time? Something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a clean, final tear, like fabric giving way. I turned on the light in my studio for the first time in years. The air smelled of dust and turpentine. I began opening the old drawers. Brushes hardened, tubes of paint long dried, sketchbooks full of faces I once cared about. Then I found it. The cracked bottle of blue ink, the one that had spilled over his portrait the night he left. The dried crust around the rim looked like a scar. I held it up to the light and said quietly, "You took my signature once, Harold. You don't get to keep it." I didn't want revenge, not exactly. Blashin'. I wanted reclamation. I wanted to take back the color he had ruined for me. So I planned a show. Not in a gallery that would reject me for being too sentimental or too old-fashioned, but right there, inside the school where he reigned. I called it The Signatures We Survive. Every canvas would hold a story of women who signed things they never got credit for. Rent checks, permission slips, apology notes, goodbye letters. Okay, all signed, all unseen. And right in the center, I placed the portrait of him. The one ruined by that blue ink, unretouched, unframed. I would let people see what betrayal looked like when it dried. I started painting again that night. My hands were stiff, but my strokes were sure. I painted until dawn, until the sun bled through the blinds and turned the room gold. Tasha woke up to the sound of brushes clattering in the sink. "Aunt Lo, are you okay?" I turned to her, hair messy, paint streaked across my arms. I'm fine, baby. Just cleaning up some old signatures. She frowned. You look different. I smiled. Maybe I finally remembered who I used to be. Over the next few weeks, I worked like someone possessed. The canvases piled up. Hands holding pens, papers half torn, faces hidden behind signatures too big for their frames. Each painting was a confession, a reclamation, a wound reopened and repainted. The school board didn't make it easy. When I requested space in the front hall, they hesitated. We've never hosted a local artist before, one administrator said. And the principal? Well, you know, he's selective about public displays. I met her gaze and replied, then this will be his first lesson in art appreciation. It took a few calls, a few borrowed favors, and a lot of persistence, but eventually, they agreed to a 1-week community exhibit. I chose the front lobby, the same hall students passed every morning, the same floor Harold's shoes would click across on his way to the main office. When the final approval email arrived, I stared at it for a long moment. The message ended with his digital signature. Sincerely, Dr. Harold E. Carter. I printed it out, tore off the bottom half, and taped the signature to my studio wall. Then, I dipped my brush in fresh blue paint, the exact shade of his ink, and wrote across it in bold strokes, "Not anymore." For the first time in 17 years, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own story. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. The woman he left, the artist he silenced, the name he erased. By the time I packed the paintings into their crates, the fear had drained out of me completely. What remained was something steadier, sharper. Not anger, but clarity. I didn't plan to confront him. I just wanted him to walk past my art every morning and remember that some signatures don't fade. They fight back. So I called the exhibit director and confirmed the date. Yes, I said, steady voice, steady hand. Hang them all in the main hall. Right where he can't miss them. And when I hung up, I whispered to myself, a promise? A vow? A signature reborn? You signed my life once, Harold. Now, I'm signing it back. That night, I didn't sleep at all. The house made every small sound louder. The radiator ticking, the wind catching under the door, the soft hum of the fridge. I opened my laptop again, typed Dr. Gopter, Harold E. Carter into the search bar, and there he was on the school website. Gray at the temples, the same practiced half-smile. Principal, Riverside High School. I stared until my eyes watered. Beneath the photo was a caption, committed to shaping future leaders. He couldn't even lead a marriage. I reached for Tasha's diploma on the table and laid it beside the portrait I had painted of him years ago, the one that used to hang over our bed. 2 signatures, 17 years apart, the same loop in the E, the same blue ink that had once stained my hands. Does he get to sign my life one more time? I whispered. The question didn't echo, it settled, heavy and final. I turned on the lamp in my old studio. Tubes of paint were hard as stones, brushes stiff with age, but the smell of turpentine still clung to everything. I found the bottle of blue ink, dried and cracked at the rim, the same ink that had bled across his portrait the night he left. You took my signature once, I said to the bottle. You don't get to keep it. That was the moment the plan arrived, as clean as a brushstroke on a blank canvas. Not revenge, redemption. Not to face him, but to reclaim the color he'd stolen from me. I would stage an exhibit inside the school itself. The signatures, we survive. Each canvas would carry a story, a mother's rent receipt, a daughter's permission slip, a resignation letter, all the papers women sign and men forget. And in the center, I'd hang his ruined portrait, blue stain and all. Hugh, I painted through the night. My fingers cramped, my wrist ached, but I didn't stop until sunrise. Light spilled across the floor, turning every dried brush into a tiny monument. When Tasha appeared in the doorway, she blinked at the mess. Aunt Lo, you're painting again? Just cleaning up some old signatures, I said, smiling for the first time in years. Over the next weeks, I worked without rest. The canvases filled the room, hands, ink, paper, faces half hidden behind names. Every stroke felt like breathing again. When I asked the school for permission to use the lobby, the administrator hesitated. The principal's particular about what gets displayed, she warned. Then it's time he learned what real art looks like, I replied. After days of calls and favors, they approved a 1-week community showcase. I chose the front hall, the path he'd walk every morning. When the confirmation email came, signed sincerely, Dr. DMA. Harold E. Carter, I printed it, tore off his name, taped it to the wall, and wrote across it in blue paint, "Not anymore." By the time I sealed the crates of finished paintings, the fear was gone. What replaced it wasn't anger, but clarity. He might still sign other people's futures, but I would sign my own. I called the coordinator to confirm the date. "Hang them all in the main hall," I said, "right where he can't miss them." Then I set the phone down, picked up my brush, and whispered the words that would carry me forward. "You signed my life once, Harold. Now I'm signing it back." The morning of the opening smelled like varnish and nerves. The lobby of Riverside High had been transformed overnight. White panels, spotlights, and rows of paintings lined like silent witnesses. My paintings. I wore black, simple, and sharp. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the last frame. In the center hung the ruined portrait. Harold beneath the elm tree, his face drowned in a blue haze. The title card read, "The Signatures We Survive, Lorraine Carter." By 9 o'clock, the teachers began arriving. Then the parents. Then the students with phones raised, filming everything. The chatter grew, footsteps echoing against the polished floor. And then the crowd hushed. He walked in. Harold. Gray suit, blue tie, that same self-assured stride. The faint scent of his cologne drifting ahead of him like a memory I never wanted back. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. 17 years hadn't erased him. They had only made him sharper, more polished. A man built from reinvention. He looked around the exhibit, expression unreadable, until his gaze found mine. Something flickered. Surprise, maybe, or guilt, though I doubted he was capable of either for long. He came closer, his voice low and controlled. "What are you doing, Lorraine?" I met his eyes. "Displaying the signatures that lied," I said evenly. "Yours. And mine." His jaw clenched. The muscle twitched the way it used to when he was caught off guard. "You're destroying my reputation." "No," I said. "I'm reclaiming my own." The words hung in the air. People were watching now. Teachers pausing mid-conversation, students whispering, phones discreetly lifting. Harold glanced around, adjusting his tie, trying to mask his discomfort with a politician's smile. "This isn't appropriate," he murmured. "You could have spoken to me privately." 17 years of silence was private, I replied. "This?" I gestured to the paintings. "This is public because that's where you built your life on my absence." His voice hardened. "You think this will change anything?" "You're bitter, Lorraine. You always were when you couldn't be in control." "Go," I said softly. "I just learned who shouldn't hold the pen." The crowd shifted. Whispers rippled like wind through paper. A few teachers exchanged uncertain looks. A parent cleared her throat. And then a young art teacher, barely 30, brave or reckless, stepped forward, reading the title card under Harold's portrait. "Dr. Carter," she said carefully. "These letters in the display, they're addressed from you to the district office." "You really signed them?" Harold froze. His eyes darted to the painting where I'd mounted the printed emails, his own messages authorizing budget transfers, written under his old, invalid credentials. "This isn't what it looks like," he said, his voice tight. "These are taken out of context." "Context," I repeated. "That's a word you loved to use when you disappeared, too." A small, nervous laugh escaped someone in the crowd, quickly stifled. He stepped closer until we stood just a few feet apart. The air smelled like tension and blue ink. "Lorraine, take this down," he whispered. "You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said. "I'm letting people see the man who signs without conscience." He flinched. Barely, but enough for me to see it. From the back of the room, a journalist from the local paper lifted her phone to record. Dr. Carter, she called out, is it true that these emails bear your digital signature? Were they part of a misappropriated grant? The color drained from his face. This is not the time or place, he said sharply. Woman is my ex-wife. She has a history of paying for your doctorate? I interrupted. Of keeping quiet while you built a life on lies? A murmur of recognition moved through the audience. He'd just admitted it, that we'd once been married. He realized too late what he'd done. The mask slipped. The charming principal turned defensive, cornered. You don't understand, Lorraine. And to start over. I had to rebuild. By pretending I never existed? By surviving. His voice rose, cracking. You wouldn't have made it without me either. That's when the silence hit. A silence so sharp you could hear the hum of the lights. I looked at him, truly looked, and saw what I hadn't before. The smallness of him. The man who used to fill rooms with confidence now looked like a figure shrinking in the frame of my portrait. Maybe you're right, I said quietly. I did survive because of you. Because you left. The words landed like a verdict. From somewhere near the front, a student whispered, "Is he serious?" A teacher replied under her breath, "Keep recording." Harold took a step back, eyes darting toward the exit, the crowd, the phones, the blue-stained portrait looming behind me. He tried for dignity. "I'm ending this event," he said. "This school will not tolerate art?" I cut in. Or accountability. A ripple of nervous laughter. He turned to the district representative who had just arrived, desperate for control. "Call security. This is harassment." But the representative hesitated, eyes flicking between us and the evidence hanging on the walls, his emails, his old credentials, his own words printed in enlarged font beside the paintings. "Dr. Carter," she said slowly, "perhaps we should talk privately about these documents." That was the final crack. His voice wavered. "This is a setup. She forged these." "I haven't forged anything," I said. "You, of all people, should know how a signature feels when it's real." The crowd gasped. Not because I shouted, but because I didn't. My voice was calm, deliberate, surgical. He looked around for support, but found none. The same teachers who once admired him avoided his eyes. The same parents who praised his discipline now whispered behind their phones. He started toward the door, but I stepped aside, letting him pass. "Go ahead," I said. "But remember, you can't erase your name this time. It's already on the wall." He stopped at the threshold, shoulders rigid. "You always wanted to humiliate me," he said without turning. "No, Harold," I answered. "I wanted you to see me." He left without another word. The doors closed behind him, leaving only the echo of his shoes and the faint rustle of paper as someone took notes. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the young art teacher approached me. "Miss Carter," she said softly, "that was incredible." I smiled faintly. "No, it was necessary." She glanced at the portrait of Harold, its face blurred by blue. "What will you do now?" I looked at it, then at the students still recording, the reporters whispering, the sunlight creeping across the floor. "Now," I said, "now I'll let the ink dry." And as I turned away, the hum of voices swelled again. Not the polite chatter of an exhibit, but the raw buzz of truth breaking through its frame. By Monday morning, my inbox was full. 3 formal letters from the district office. 2 from lawyers. And 1 from him. Subject: defamation and violation of professional conduct. "Lorraine, your exhibit contains materials and implications that harm the reputation of Riverside High and its administration. Remove the display immediately or face legal consequences for libel and harassment. Dr. Harold E. Carter." It was almost funny, his tone still lecturing, still paternal, like the world was his classroom and I was the failing student. I printed the email, framed it, and hung it in the center of the lobby. Underneath, in black paint, I wrote, "One more signature of his. This time, I'm the witness." By noon, the students had already taken pictures. By evening, they'd posted them online. The post went viral before dinner. Blue ink scandal trended locally for 3 days. The district couldn't ignore it anymore. The local paper called the next morning asking for an interview. The headline ran that same afternoon, "Artist Lorraine Carter, the woman who turned betrayal into art." The photo showed me standing beside Harold's portrait, half his face washed in blue. My arms crossed, my eyes steady. They called it iconic. At first, I didn't care about the attention. I'd spent years invisible. A little visibility couldn't hurt. But fame, even accidental, always has teeth. The school board started receiving anonymous complaints. Teachers were told not to comment publicly. Students who'd posted in support of the exhibit were warned about digital misconduct. Harold played his favorite role, the victim. He issued a public statement. Riverside High stands for education, not exploitation. It's regrettable when personal grievances are weaponized against institutions of learning. Weaponized. That word stuck in my throat. I answered by doing nothing. At least, not yet. I let the story grow legs on its own. The gallery crowd multiplied every day. Mothers came with their daughters, alumni brought flowers, even strangers left notes. "Thank you for signing back." Someone printed stickers of my quote, "You don't get to sign my life again." They appeared on lockers, lampposts, even the back of city buses. The same week, a local talk show invited me for a segment titled "The Principal, the Painter, and the Truth." I almost declined, but Tasha said, "If you stay silent, he controls the story again." So I went. Under the studio lights, the host leaned forward. "Mrs. Carter, did you intend to expose your ex-husband?" "No," I said. "I intended to expose a pattern of men who sign without consent." The audience gasped softly. I could feel their empathy, their curiosity, their hunger. That night, the clip reached 50,000 views. By Friday, Harold started losing ground. The district launched an internal audit. Rumors circulated that his credentials were being reviewed. He responded by tightening control at school. Teachers whispered about new surveillance rules, emails being monitored, a no photography policy in the hallways. He tried to erase me again, this time digitally. My artist page was flooded with fake reviews calling me unstable, vengeful, a liar. My old address was leaked online. One night, I found a dead bouquet on my porch, lilies of all things. I took a photo and posted it with the caption, "Even grief has better timing than Harold." It got 12,000 likes. But inside, I was tired. The attention that once felt vindicating now felt heavy, invasive. Every time my phone buzzed, I braced for another threat, another headline twisting my story into something sensational. Tasha noticed. "You don't sleep anymore," she said. "Neither does justice," I replied, half joking. "Yours." Still, she was right. I was running on adrenaline, not peace. One evening, as I left the school after checking on the exhibit, Harold was waiting by my car. The parking lot was empty, the air thick with summer heat. He stepped out of the shadows, looking smaller than before. "You've made your point," he said quietly. "Get down, Lorraine." "Why?" "Because you're turning both of us into a circus." "Who built the tent?" "I just turned on the lights." He exhaled sharply. "You don't understand what you've started. There are people involved, funding, positions. Then maybe they shouldn't have signed their names beside yours. You always did think the world revolved around your art, and you always thought it revolved around your title." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a hiss. "You're going to regret this." "I already have," I said. "For 17 years. He turned away, shoulders tight, walking into the dark. The sound of his shoes faded, but his words stayed. The next morning, the janitor called. Someone had vandalized the exhibit. The frames were slashed, the glass shattered, blue paint smeared across the floor like spilled blood. I stood there, staring at the destruction. The same color he'd claimed, now weaponized again. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then I noticed the pattern. Only one painting remained untouched, his portrait. The blue stain across his face looked darker under the morning light, as if mocking me. Tasha arrived minutes later. "Oh my God, who would do this?" "Someone who still thinks they own the ink," I said. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I called a photographer. By afternoon, the new exhibit was ready. Not cleaned up, but left exactly as it was. Broken frames, scattered glass, blue footprints leading nowhere. I renamed it Collateral Damage. I posted the photos online with the caption, "You can destroy the art, but you can't erase the artist's signature." Within hours, it went national. Harold's PR team scrambled. They accused vandals of targeting the school, but the story slipped out of his control. The vandalism looked too deliberate, too pointed. Some speculated it was staged to gain sympathy. Others whispered that he'd done it himself to discredit me. The superintendent announced an emergency meeting. When asked for comment, I said only, "I'm not seeking vengeance. I'm seeking authorship." It was the most honest thing I'd ever said. But the attention brought more than validation. It brought danger. One evening, my studio window shattered. A rock rolled across the floor with a note tied to it. "Stop painting, or next time it won't be glass." I took a picture of the note, posted it, and tagged the district. This is what silence protects. The post hit 100,000 shares. People began showing up at the school, leaving flowers at the steps, sticky notes on the doors. "We believe you." Parents demanded answers. Students organized a blue ink walkout, holding up pens in the air as a protest against corruption. Harold's empire of signatures began to crumble. He doubled down, of course. Filed a restraining order attempt, leaked parts of my divorce application that I'd never even finished filing. Anything to make me look unstable. But each attempt backfired. Every new accusation drew more eyes to the truth. The story had grown bigger than either of us. One evening, exhausted, I returned home to find Tasha waiting on the porch, holding a tablet. Her eyes were wide. "Aunt Lo," she whispered, "you need to see this." She handed it to me. The screen showed a leaked document, a whistleblower report from inside the district. Someone had uncovered years of falsified grant signatures, all bearing the same blue ink. At the bottom of the scanned page, "Approved, Dr. Harold E. Carter." Tasha looked at me. "He's been forging everything, hasn't he?" I nodded slowly. "Looks like the pen finally ran out." That night, I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady, as if the universe had simply balanced its own books. But I knew one thing. The game wasn't over. Because a man like Harold doesn't surrender, he strategizes, and I could already feel the air thickening with the weight of his next move. The message came at midnight. No subject line, just an attachment and 3 words. "Julio, you should see this." The sender's name was unfamiliar. Marianne Polk, a retired secretary from the district office. I hesitated, half expecting another threat, but something in the tone felt different. Tired, honest. The file was a scanned folder of official documents, certificates, transcripts, appointment letters, all bearing one unmistakable detail. The same looping blue ink signature, Dr. Harold E. Carter, but not just his. At the bottom of each page sat another name, Evelyn Marks, District Supervisor. Except the strokes were wrong. I remembered Evelyn. She'd been left-handed, her loops wider, her pressure lighter. The signatures in the documents leaned right, sharp, deliberate. The same confident slant Harold had used since grad school. He hadn't just forged paperwork, he'd forged authority. For 5 years, the man who once lied to me about business trips had been lying to an entire education system, stamping his own future with stolen names. I printed every page and spread them across the table. The smell of ink and old toner filled the air, so much like those nights when I used to iron his shirts before conferences. The difference was, this time I wasn't cleaning up after him. I was building the case. My hands trembled as I aligned the pages edge to edge. The blue strokes glinted under the desk lamp. Identical, precise, rehearsed. He probably practiced them the same way he once practiced his signature in our apartment, tracing it over and over on napkins while I graded papers beside him. "Consistency is credibility," he'd said back then. Now, consistency was his noose. I called Marianne the next morning. Her voice was raspy, anxious. I couldn't live with it anymore. she said. He used my login, Lorraine. My credentials. He told me the files were temporary copies, but when I left, they stayed on the system. The district buried the trail. He's protected by donors, by names bigger than mine. You're safe, I told her. Thank you for trusting me. She sighed. I just want it to end. Make sure he can't sign anything again. When we hung up, I sat in silence, staring at the pile of forgeries. This was bigger than marriage, bigger than humiliation. It was fraud, layered, deliberate, institutional. And yet, I didn't feel rage. Not anymore. Just a deep, bone-level clarity. I picked up one of the pages, tracing the forged signature with my fingertip. The blue ink shimmered faintly, catching the morning light like a bruise healing too slowly. You even stole someone else's name, I murmured. Guess mine wasn't enough. I could almost hear his voice answering. It's just paperwork, Lorraine. Everyone does it. But no, paperwork is what makes the world believe the lie. I knew what I had to do. I opened my sketchbook, the one I hadn't touched since the exhibit, and began to draw. Not people this time, not faces or hands. I drew lines, pages, signatures. Layer after layer of forged marks, until the entire sheet looked like a storm of blue ink collapsing into itself. This would be the last piece. The final painting in The Signatures We Survive. Alrighty, its title came easily. Forgery. For hours I painted in silence. Each stroke was a confession I never got from him. Each mark, a statement of proof. The smell of acrylic mixed with coffee, the hum of the city outside fading into background noise. By the time I finished, the sun was rising, pale light touching the drying canvas, turning the blue ink almost silver. I looked at it and felt something I hadn't in years. Peace, sharp and still. The phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. You don't know what you've started. No name. But I didn't need one. I smiled, set the phone down, and whispered to the empty room. No, Harold. You don't know what I've finished. Then I took the painting, still wet at the edges, and carried it to the center of the studio. For the first time, I didn't hide it behind glass. I left it bare, exposed, a mirror for the truth to breathe through. Tomorrow, it would hang beside his forged documents, framed for everyone to see. And when they asked what it meant, I'd tell them simply, this is what happens when you sign too many lives with the same hand. I enlarged the fake certificate to almost poster size. The bold lettering, the faint seal, the blue ink still looping the E. Everything was magnified beyond recognition. I placed it on a metal shelf in the middle of the temporary exhibition room in the art community warehouse I rented as a studio when no other gallery would take me. The title I pasted on the frame, The Final Signature. Short, no long explanation. People walked up, looked at the signature, and wondered. Who would allow a pen to change someone's life? The plan hadn't been born overnight. I'd woken up every morning for the past 10 days with a to-do list. I'd called Marianne again, the person who'd sent me the files, and asked her to confirm the timelines, reprint the original files, and give me a sworn statement that she'd seen the documents in the system. She arrived at the studio at 9, hunched over, carrying a paper bag. She looked at the poster, her eyes moist. I'm scared, Lorraine, she said. But if no one says anything, he'll keep going. I replied. We're doing the right thing. I contacted the young art teacher, Miss Hannah, who had stood by me at the opening. She agreed to call a few supportive parents to help spread the word about the announcement. She even promised to bring a group of students along so they could see the story in person instead of just seeing it online. The next step was the press. I drafted a short, objective invitation, date, time, location, and a single line summarizing the purpose. Release of documentary evidence related to the Riverside Education Funding approval process. I sent invitations to the local paper, the TV station, and the regional education newspaper. Attached were scans of all the documents we had, but I left the sensitive parts unprinted. I wanted them to come in person, to see the real evidence, not an email or a headline. I knew Harold had money, connections, and the kind of power playing he used to frame the truth. I contacted a community lawyer, a woman who had helped run a small nonprofit in the county. She looked over the documents, nodded. "There's enough prima facie evidence to get attention," she said. "But don't make public accusations without supporting evidence. We need witnesses and original records." I agreed. I prepared copies of everything, including Marianne's statement. I printed out several copies, bound them neatly, and left them on a press table. It was on my mind. After the last vandalism, I didn't want to let my personal life get in the way of the attendees. I hired a small security team, 2 people, no armor, but enough to direct the flow of people and separate the exhibition area from the traffic. They were told to be gentle with students, stern with strangers. I knew that public threats would heighten the intensity of the event, but I didn't want to encourage any violence. Then there was the visual. I placed the final signature in the center, but without dominating the space. Around it were panels, scanned certificates with stamps, email exchanges, a list of donors where his name appeared with an exaggerated signature. I added a small shelf with local newspaper prints, both supportive and critical, so that visitors could see the dialogue. In one corner, I placed a testimony book, where people who had been affected could sign and write their own stories. I didn't want the event to be just a personal exposure. I wanted it to be a scene of a systemic problem. Tasha was involved in everything, from labeling to lighting. He had pride in her eyes. When I asked her if she was scared, she just shook her head. "You've had enough, Aunt Lo. It's time for the world to hear." That was the word that stopped me in my tracks. I even thought about how to script the moment. When the press and parents were there, I would invite representatives from the Department of Education to come at the same time. I sent them an invitation, not calling for an investigation, just an invitation to see a community exhibition. But I also sent the file to an investigative journalist who had written about local corruption, with a reminder. I didn't need to show off. I needed someone who could get the file into the right hands. Another small plan. I prepared a short speech to read. I didn't want to give a long speech. I wrote a few sentences on paper. Who I am, what I've sacrificed, and a short question. Who allows a signature to decide someone else's life? I practiced my voice until it was calm enough, steady enough to not allow others to turn it into drama or wailing. The night before the event, I went to school. Not to see him, but to see the path he took every day. The hallways were shiny, the bulletin board hung as usual. I stood in the corner, imagining him passing by every day. Head bowed, eyes glancing, no one looking directly. I thought of the families who gave their children to him, trusting the signature on the paper. I thought of the children who would grow up, hearing this story as a lesson in power, not worship. Early the next morning, the press team arrived. Cameras, microphones, reporters lined up. Parents, pulling out chairs, telling the children to stay calm. Marianne arrived, her hands shaking but her eyes bright. Hannah led a group of students with pens and paper to sign the book of testimony. Tasha hugged me tightly, whispering, "I trust you." I took a deep breath, looked around, then stepped onto the small podium I had prepared. The cameras were on me like the curious eyes of the city. I gently stroked the enlarged poster, clutching the piece of paper with the few sentences I would read. There was no hammering, no shouting, just breathing. I opened my mouth, my voice barely audible in the space. "I'm not here to destroy anyone. I'm here to return the power of choice to those whose names I signed for. This is the final signature." When the camera panned to the enlarged fake certificate, everyone's eyes turned to it. I knew the moment had set a trap. Not for him alone, but for the entire system that had allowed a single word so trustworthy that it could entangle the fate of others. And that's when I was ready to pull the curtain back, to move from exhibition to testimony, from pain to change. Riverside High had never been so crowded that morning. The hallways were packed with people, television cameras squeezed between the lines of parents. Reporters had press tags on their shirts, and footsteps, cameras, and whispers combined into a roaring, ocean-like noise. I stood behind the black curtain covering the final signature. On the other side, I heard Tasha's voice, her voice mixed into the loudspeaker. "Please keep quiet. The program is about to begin." I smoothed my sleeves. In my coat pocket, I clutched Marianne's letter, her testimony about the fake certificate. The paper was slightly crumpled, but the ink was still legible. It was the same familiar blue ink now evidence. The light shone dimly through the crack in the curtain. I inhaled deeply, the smell of oil paint and worry mingling. Outside, a male voice rang out. Low, somewhat trembling. "We are honored today to welcome, the Director of Education and Principal Doctor of Education, Harold Carter." Sporadic applause, mixed with the constant flash of cameras. I didn't need to look to know where he was. In the middle, his collar neatly adjusted, his eyes controlling the crowd as usual. But today, he didn't know this stage was not his. As I stepped out, the noise died down, then stopped. I walked slowly, straight toward the microphone in the middle of the room. Tasha nodded slightly at me, and Hannah, the young teacher, stood in the left corner, holding the testimony book. I spoke calmly, without the microphone. "Thank you all for coming. I'm Lorraine Carter, a former teacher at this school. And today, I just want to tell a story about signatures." A few people chuckled, thinking I was about to talk about art. They didn't know what I was about to expose. I signaled to Hannah. She pulled the string. The black curtain fell. Immediately, the spotlights shone on the final signature. A giant certificate, magnified 10 times its original size, was in the middle of a steel frame. The signature, Evelyn Marks. District supervisor glowed under the glass, reflecting the flash. And next to it, a reporter raised his camera and panned in the blue ink, the right-angled stroke, the curl in the E. Exactly like Harold's signature. The room erupted in murmurs, then fell silent. I turned to the audience. This isn't just a man's signature. This is the signature society has let a coward sign instead of justice. My voice echoed through the loudspeakers, echoing down the hall. The camera quickly panned to Harold. He stood still. In the light, his face paled. Next to him, the Education Department representative frowned slightly, looking down at the real copies of the certificates they were carrying, clearly different. A parent suddenly stood up, his voice as loud as a hammer. "You teach my child about honor?" Applause, noise, and the sound of video cameras exploding everywhere. Harold raised his hand to speak, but I held the microphone. "Want to respond?" I asked calmly. "This is a hoax," he said, emphasizing each word. "A personal vendetta orchestrated by a spiteful woman. I have devoted my life to education." "Education by fake signatures, Harold," I replied. 5 documents, same pen, same ink. Evelyn Marks. The person you impersonate is sitting out there, ready to confirm that she never signed those certificates herself. Everyone turned. A silver-haired woman stood up holding a form. "That's right," she said loudly. "I never approved Mr. Carter. He used a copy of the old seal." The hall exploded. Harold tried to keep his composure, but sweat began to roll down his temples. "This is political intrigue," he shouted. "You don't understand what I did to save this school." "Save the school? Or save my reputation?" I said. He stepped forward, trying to grab the microphone, but 2 security guards I'd hired stepped between them. I didn't back away. Cameras were rolling, flashbulbs were ringing. "Lorraine, you don't understand, I just—" "Enough," I interrupted. "You once taught me that a signature is a lifelong commitment. Thank you. I just signed my name to freedom." I put down the microphone. The applause was like a wave. Not a chaotic cheer, but a steady, steady wave after wave. Harold turned away, his face ashen. The Education Department representative stepped forward, gently touching his shoulder. "Dr. Carter, we need you to come with us to clarify a few things." Without the microphone, without the security crowd, he suddenly became smaller. The figure that had once confidently walked across the schoolyard now trudged like a student being called into the disciplinary room. He walked quickly to the door, avoiding all cameras, but not escaping the whispers behind him. "Is that her ex-husband? Oh my God, it's like a movie." No, it's real. The department will investigate. Nasha ran to hug me. You did it, she whispered. I just smiled, saying nothing. On the other side, Hannah burst into tears, not out of pity, but out of relief. I've never seen students clap for a teacher like today, she said. The reporter rushed over, the microphone pointed at my face. Ms. Lorraine, what do you want to say to women who are suffering injustice? I replied slowly. Just one thing. Keep your signature. Don't let anyone else write it for you. Your story. Then I turned and stepped down from the podium. That afternoon, the local news broadcast a special. The image of the final signature flashed on the screen, along with Harold being taken to work with the Department of Education. Line, the host read slowly. According to sources, Dr. Ole, Carter's educational management records show signs of forgery. An investigation is underway. Social media exploded again. Netizens shared my final words. You once taught me that a signature is a lifelong commitment. Thank you. I just signed my name to freedom. The quote appeared on posters, on coffee cups, on the hashtag #TheFinalSignature. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was the simplest truth of someone who had been signed for. That night, I returned to the workshop. The final signature was still standing there, the yellow light shining on the glass, reflecting my face. No more shaking, no more stinging, just silence. Tasha sat by the window, quietly asking, "Do you regret it?" I shook my head. If I didn't do it, I would have continued to be signed for. But now that I'm standing here, whether the ink is dry or not, at least it's my own handwriting. I took out my pen and opened the statement book. Hundreds of signatures from parents, teachers, and students had been filled in. At the bottom, there was a blank line. I signed. Lorraine Carter, no longer cowering, no longer trembling. Outside, the wind was blowing. The banner hanging at the school gate was fluttering. On it were the words printed in large letters. The final signature, an exhibit by Lorraine Carter. I looked at it for a long time, then turned off the light, because I knew that from tomorrow, no one could use that blue pen to decide my life again. Harold was suspended within a week. The district opened a formal investigation, and the newspapers lost no time turning him into a headline. The principal with too many signatures. For once, the story wasn't written by him. I didn't watch the news. I'd already seen everything I needed to. Instead, I went back to teaching. Not at Riverside, but at the small community center on Maple Street. The paint still peeled off the walls, the air smelled faintly of clay and turpentine, but the children came anyway. They called me Miss Lowe, the woman who paints promises. I didn't know who started it, but it stuck. Every Thursday afternoon, we sat in a circle with mismatched easels and tiny jars of leftover paint. The kids didn't care about technique. They painted clouds that looked like dinosaurs, sunsets that looked like orange juice spills. And for the first time in years, I laughed while the color dried. I didn't talk about Harold. I didn't need to. The city was doing that for me. Sometimes a parent would linger at pickup, squeeze my hand, and whisper, "Thank you for standing up." I'd smile, but the truth was simpler. I hadn't stood up. I'd just stopped kneeling. The exhibition space downtown still carried traces of the chaos. Scuff marks, peeling tape, one wall stained with that stubborn streak of blue ink from the day it all began. People offered to repaint it. A volunteer group even sent an email. "We can clean it for you, Miss Carter." I said no. One evening, Tasha dropped by after class, still wearing her college hoodie, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She stood in front of that wall for a long time, the one still marked with the faint blue smear. "Aunt Lo," she said finally, "why don't you paint over it?" "It'd look nicer." I looked at the wall. The uneven texture, the memory frozen in pigment. "Because it's the last signature of the past," I said quietly. "And I need it to remember that I survived." She didn't reply. She just nodded, like she understood more than I expected her to. Outside, the evening light spilled through the windows, soft and golden, the same hue I used to chase in my early paintings. For the first time, it didn't hurt to see it. Harold's name still appeared occasionally, in small print, in reports about the investigation, pending review, under administrative leave. Each time I skimmed past it, there was no satisfaction, only distance. He used to say a signature was proof that you existed. I think he was wrong. Existence isn't ink on paper. It's the breath you still take after someone tried to erase you. On Fridays, I stayed late after class, cleaning brushes while the last bits of daylight turned the room copper. The silence was different now. Not heavy, not haunted, just quiet. Sometimes, when no one was around, I'd dip a brush into the leftover blue paint and make a small line on the corner of the wall, barely visible, almost hidden, not out of spite, but gratitude. Because even a ruined color can start something new. That night, as I locked up the studio, I looked one last time at the stain on the wall. The blue that used to mean his control, now only proof of mine. It was strange, peaceful even, to realize that I didn't hate him anymore. I just didn't need him in the story. The world outside buzzed with Friday traffic, neon signs blinking across the street. I slipped my keys into my pocket and whispered, mostly to myself, "It's enough." And for the first time in 17 years, it was. A year passed. Time didn't heal, it rearranged. The noise faded, the headlines disappeared, and the city moved on. But I didn't return to silence. Instead, I opened a small studio on the corner of Birch and 8th. Signature Revival Studio. The sign out front was painted by one of my former students. The S in signature looped too wide, the paint slightly uneven, and I loved it that way. Inside, the walls smelled of fresh plaster and possibility. Here, I taught women how to sign again. Not contracts, not divorce papers, not apology letters, but certificates of freedom. Blank sheets where they could write their own names without fear of correction, judgment, or approval. The class filled faster than I expected. Women from all over Riverside, secretaries, nurses, retired teachers, even a postal worker, came with trembling hands and long stories. We met twice a week. I taught them how to hold a brush like a pen, to feel the weight of their own names again. We practiced loops and strokes until confidence replaced hesitation. Every time someone finished, we framed her name and stamped it, approved by herself. Some laughed, some cried, some stood in silence, staring at the paper as if it were a mirror they hadn't looked into in decades. One woman whispered, "It's been 20 years since I wrote my full name." My husband always filled out the forms. I nodded, pressing her shoulder gently. "Then this," I said, "is your first real signature." That was the entire purpose of the studio. Not to make artists, but to make authors of their own lives again. On the back wall, I hung a shadow box. Inside it, sealed behind glass, was the same diploma envelope from that day. The one signed by Harold. The ink had faded slightly, but the blue still gleamed under the light. Below it, engraved in brass, the inscription read, "Signed once by him, sealed forever by me." It wasn't anger anymore. It was a reminder of how far ink can travel, and how far I had come from it. One afternoon, during a quiet session, a student named Grace, a librarian in her 50s with soft eyes and a habit of overthinking, raised her hand. "Miss Lorraine," she asked, "do you still fear blue ink?" The room went still. Even the ceiling fan seemed to pause. I smiled. "No," I said. "I only fear people who still don't dare to sign their own names." The women laughed. A low, knowing sound. Grace grinned, dipped her pen into a small jar of cobalt paint, and wrote her name in one confident stroke. I could almost hear the echo of 1,000 silent signatures finally breaking free. Some evenings, after the students left, I stayed behind to clean the tables. The light from the street outside would fall through the window bars, painting long stripes across the floor. In the quiet, I often thought of Harold. Not with hate, not even with pity. Just with distance, like recalling a character from an old book you once read too many times. He'd moved out of state after the investigation, the papers said. The district revoked his credentials. There were whispers of a teaching ban, maybe a civil case. I didn't follow up, because by then, I understood His story had ended. Mine was still being written. Sometimes Tasha dropped by, now studying art therapy at the community college. She helped me organize classes, and she painted a small mural on the far wall, an open book where the pages turned into brushstrokes. At the bottom, she wrote in tiny letters, "Every signature is a story that refused to die." It made me tear up the first time I saw it. On the studio's anniversary, we held an open house. The city's women came in groups, some dragging their daughters, others bringing their mothers. We hung every certificate from the year along the walls. Hundreds of names, different colors, different shapes. Some shaky, some bold, all real. When I stood back and looked at them, it felt like standing inside a storm of rebirth. Each name a pulse, each line a heartbeat. During the event, a journalist from the local magazine approached me. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "why call it Signature Revival?" I thought about it, then answered simply, "Because revival isn't about starting over. It's about realizing you were alive the whole time." That line made it into print. But what didn't make it, what I told her after she turned off the recorder, was the truth. That the studio wasn't just for the women who came here. It was for the woman I used to be. Near the end of the evening, as people mingled, I noticed a small envelope on my desk. No name, just a single folded note inside. It read, "Thank you for returning what he took." No signature. And that felt perfect. That night, after everyone left, I locked up the studio and turned off the lights. The only thing glowing in the darkness was that framed envelope, the one signed by him, sealed by me. I stood there for a while, letting the quiet fill the room. For years, I'd lived afraid of that color, that looped letter E, that sense that a signature could own me. Now, I'd built an entire life out of reclaiming it. I thought of my first brushstroke after he left, trembling, uncertain. And the last one I'd painted this morning. Steady, sure. Freedom didn't arrive like lightning. It came quietly, in the sound of paper being signed by your own hand. I picked up a blank sheet from the desk and wrote, "Lorraine Carter." Simple, unadorned, mine. Then underneath, I added a date. 1 year free. I pinned it to the corkboard near the door, right next to the certificates of my students. The blue ink shimmered under the lamplight, no longer a weapon, but a witness. Before leaving, I looked once more at the wall, at all the names surrounding mine. They didn't need my approval. They never had. And for the first time in my life, that truth didn't sting. It sang. I turned off the last light and whispered into the dark, "Signed once by him. Lived forever by me." Then I stepped outside, the night air cool against my skin, the street alive with sound. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a survivor. I felt like an author. The camera light blinked red. Recording. I took a breath, steady and slow, and faced it head on. Behind me, the wall of Signature Revival Studio was filled with names. Women's names, handwritten in every shade of blue, black, and gold. Some small, some sprawling, some trembling. All real. I looked straight into the lens. My reflection stared back. Older, calmer, and finally, whole. If one day, I began, you see the name of someone who once hurt you printed on the certificate of someone you love, don't be afraid. I paused, letting the words sink in. The room around me was silent except for the faint hum of the camera. "Maybe," I continued, "it's not a sign of the past coming back to haunt you, but a chance for you to sign your own life again." I leaned forward, elbows on the table, fingers loosely interlaced, no script, no cue cards. Just me. People think freedom comes with permission, with a judge's approval, a signature from someone important, a door finally opened by someone else. But it doesn't. Freedom starts the moment you stop waiting for another person's pen. For years, I had been the kind of woman who waited. For apologies, explanations, closure. But waiting is just another way of staying silent. Now, I wanted the women watching this, the tired ones, the polite ones, the ones still shrinking their names on every form, to know that they didn't have to. If you've been signed over, signed out, or signed away, take the paper back. Write your name again. Bigger this time. Messier, if you have to. Just make sure it's yours. The producer behind the camera gave me a nod to wrap up. I smiled a little. Share this story, I said softly. Not for me, but for someone who might still think her name isn't worth writing down. Remind her that sometimes freedom begins with a signature that doesn't need anyone's permission. The camera light flickered once more, then faded. I sat there for a moment, still, the echo of my own voice hanging in the air. Through the studio window, the city outside was alive. Car horns, laughter, a saxophone from somewhere down the block. For years, I had heard those sounds as reminders of a world that moved on without me. Tonight, they sounded like proof that I'd finally caught up. I turned back toward the wall of signatures, hundreds of names shimmering under soft light. Each one, a story, a declaration, a rebellion written in cursive. I traced my fingers along the edge of my own certificate, framed in the middle of them all. Lorraine Carter. No titles. No prefixes. No borrowed ink. Just me. My story ends here, I whispered, more to myself than to the camera. But maybe it's also the first signature that truly belongs to me.